Good afternoon, intuitives. So I have a little different video right now. I'm posing a question. I'm not making any assumptions about this individual's motives. I'm simply asking based on the fact that there is a, high per capita percentage of intuitives who watch this channel because after all, I am an INFJ. A lot of my content's INFJ related, and thus it also relates to other intuitives like ENFJs, INFPs, ENFPs, etc. So a few weeks ago, I was catching up with one of my friends from my time at University of Toronto, and he informed me of this story about the teacher Kerry slash Kayla Lemieux of Oakville Trafalgar High School in the Ontario province of Canada. And it's a bit of an interesting story because from what I could gather, from what I could read, is Lemieux was previously in a lot of trouble with the school administration. Apparently, uh, Kerry Lemieux, as this individual was known at the time, was dispensing what was described as red pill knowledge to his students. Lemieux was slash is a shop teacher at that high school, and apparently there were complaints made, and Lemieux was in hot water with the school administration. So shortly thereafter, in 2021, Lemieux came out as transgender and began to work at the school in a blonde wig, women's clothes, and most predominantly size Z prosthetic breasts. Yes, size Z. Didn't know that was, didn't know they came that big, to be perfectly honest. So from the beginning, obviously the site is very noticeable because that is, I would say, extremely rare, if not unheard of, naturally. And Lemieux would also, not wear a bra with said prosthetics, so see-through nipples were a thing, and this is high school, these are teenagers, right? So the parents and the community as a whole made a lot of complaints. There were protests outside the school, bomb threats. The school administration supports Lemieux's right to transition, which is the correct thing to do. But the big question in this particular case is Lemieux the ultimate troll? So a lot of people find it interesting that Lemieux comes out as trans, very shortly after Lemieux was in trouble with the administration for being, quote, anti-woke, being very conservative, being red pill and dispensing this knowledge. And then not only comes out trans, but decides to express their gender identity in a matter that is often, in what I've read, described as cartoonish. I'll be honest, the first thing that came to my mind when I heard of this story was the trans ginger episode of South Park and Eric Cartman. In fact, when I saw a picture of Lemieux without his prosthetics and wig, like dressed, a picture of Lemieux from when he identified as male, Lemieux kind of resembled, what a adult Eric Cartman could look like facial features and facial shape and physique-wise. So it was quite reminiscent of that episode. So the question does arise, and I'm not saying one way or the other, but I'm curious, is it possible that Lemieux is trying to, quote, use the system against itself, like work the system against it, and try to push this, try to be as outlandish as possible to see, if he can get away with it and how far he can push it. There are some that have theorized, because former students of his were interviewed, and they spoke of how he was the complete opposite just a few years prior, and it's their belief, and these are people who know slash knew Lemieux, that Lemieux is most likely doing this to get fired and then have a civil suit against the school for wrongful termination. It was also pointed out in one of these articles that Lemieux has a still up but stagnant YouTube channel. I think it was called Tech Design Teach. And in these videos, Lemieux's voice is substantially different from what Lemieux uses as their voice now. So that's interesting. But perhaps the most interesting is that neighbors of Lemieux in Lemieux's apartment complex say that Lemieux wears the prosthetics and the feminine clothing very infrequently, like typically just to go to work, which is a high school, and occasionally to take walks, but is often spotted without the prosthetics and wearing men's clothes that they have noticed Lemieux wearing for years. In other words, clothes Lemieux owned long before he came out as trans. So he or she, I'm not sure. It's tough to call that one. I'm not being anti-trans, but if you're flip-flopping on what you call yourself day to day, who can be sure? Seems like a big decision, and I think most people that take that decision don't take it lightly and think about it for quite some time, like usually years. So Lemieux was spotted and photographed. Kayla Lemieux was spotted and photographed dressed as Kerry Lemieux, and was later asked about that and denied that those pictures were of that individual. And then Lemieux was also asked, well, if it's not you, who is it? And they refused to answer. But photographs that were taken, I believe, in last year, are like nearly identical, if not identical, to photographs of Lemieux from the prior year before Lemieux came out as trans. So that's interesting. I haven't found any like interviews, especially video interviews with Lemieux. Some reporter for the Post, I forget which Post it was, did approach Lemieux and asked, why, not why Lemieux was in transition, but why express their gender identity so outlandishly. And from what I read, Lemieux replied, "These are real, boys." So, Lemieux expressed that the size Z breasts were real and that it was due to a rare medical condition. Lemieux said that she was intersex, like XXY, born with an extra X chromosome, and due to taking estrogen therapy for transitioning, that Lemieux had a rare genetic condition that caused like massive growth in the breasts and quite rapidly. Such a condition does exist, but the article said there's only about 300 known cases. And more interesting is that Lemieux does not have a formal diagnosis of this extremely rare condition. I don't remember the name of it, but it's really interesting that Lemieux is spotted with size Z breast one day and without them the next. So kind of makes it hard to say that they're real and it's due to a medical condition if your appearance can switch that drastically from one day to the next, which does ask the question is, what is Lemieux's endgame? Is this the most epic trolling job ever done? Lemieux has every right, and others have every right to transition if that's truly who they are. But from what I've seen, most people who transition want to blend in with the gender they identify with, whereas Lemieux's appearance is to be as noticed as possible. It seems like very much like attention-seeking behavior from all the articles and things that I've read. So it does make one wonder what is truly going on here. Is this an attention-seeking behavior? Is Lemieux trying to say, well, how far is too far? I'll show you too far, and basically see how far she can push this until the system breaks, and thus fired and lawsuit. From what I've read now, there were rules at the school where they couldn't take photographs of Lemieux because apparently Lemieux's appearance was extremely disruptive for teenagers, and possibly there were concerns about safety given that Lemieux's a shop teacher because she was photographed in the shop with jewelry on, and her long hair not pulled back, working power saw equipment. It's been a long time since I was in high school and took a shop class, but I had long hair back then and I had to pull it back. And I do remember the teacher telling everybody to remove watches and all kinds of jewelry and roll up long sleeves. But, you know, this is 20 years ago too, but I'm sure safety like that hasn't changed. So I'm asking your opinion, intuitives. What does your intuition tell you? You know, look up the story. You know, it's quite interesting. Is this, you know, somebody genuinely transitioning? Was this some person, Lemieux, self-hating about who they truly are and got to a point where they were able to express themselves? Or is this the most epic troll job of all time? Is this a real life Eric Cartman? So leave your comments below about what you think is going on, and we will see how this story develops.